Welcome to the meeting, Policy and Scrutiny Committee, held today in Committee Room 1. The room does have automatic cameras and sound tracking and microphones in the ceiling. Given this, I would like to remind members of a couple of things. Please continue to speak clearly and do not whisper. Please keep other sounds to a minimum. Whispering, shuffling of papers, typing loudly on your keyboard may bring the camera to you. Please bear in mind that the ceiling microphones are sensitive and may pick up conversations in the room, including informal remarks. We are live streaming the meeting on YouTube, and a recording of this meeting will also be available afterwards. We are not expecting a fire alarm test today. If the fire alarm should sound, attendees should follow the officers out of the doors to the side of the room and leave the building via the nearest fire exit, which will be down the stairs in the foyer and into Duke Street. You should then make your way to the location assembly point in the grounds of the cathedral opposite. Thank you. Just to welcome our visitors this morning, Councillor Kevin Medley, Councillor Louise McKinley, Richard and Suzanne and Tom as well. Welcome. Where are we? Apologies.
Okay, Chairman. So we have apologies from within the committee from Councillors Pond, Henderson and Stamp, but they're all intending either have or I think they have actually all joined via Zoom instead. In addition, this is the meeting and subject matter where we invite the Chairman and Vice Chairman of the other three scrutiny committees as well. So we here in the meeting room, I noticed we have Councillor Ray Gooding, who's the Chairman of the People and Families Committee, Peter May, who's the Vice Chairman of that committee, and Clive Souter, who is the Vice Chairman of the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. In addition, I believe, although I don't think they've joined yet, I think the intention is that Jeff Henry, who's the Chairman of the Health Scrutiny Committee, Alan Goggin, who's the Chairman of the Place Services and Economic Growth Committee, and Dave Harris, who's the Vice Chairman of the Health Overview and Policy Scrutiny Committee, are also intending to join, Chairman, but haven't done yet via Zoom.
Okay. Members, you all had a copy of the minutes. Everybody happy that I sign those off as an accurate record? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Questions from the public?
We have done, Chairman.
None? Okay. Item 4, performance discussion, quarter 2, 2022 to 23. Okay, who's taken?
So, Chairman, I believe the leader probably will want to introduce this item, but there are three parts to the item. I don't know whether you wish to split the subsequent questioning into those three areas or not.
Well, if the members are happy, what we'll do is we've got 4A, 4B and 4C. When we get to the end of each section, we take questions at that time.
Okay. Chairman, I'm completely in your hands if you wish to progress. Clearly there are three main areas. One is a regular feature here, which is the KPIs, which you may want to talk about. Clearly it's all laid out with explanations and commentary. I would imagine the two big areas would be around devolution. For a catch-up, all members have been invited to briefings on devolution. And of course, levelling up, which we've just celebrated a year on, with the launch of a year on at the House of Commons, which the Deputy Leader will be able to take you through and what a tremendous event that was and some of the accomplishments we've had so far. Bearing in mind, levelling up is not done in a year, it is generational change, but some things we have achieved in that time, and I'm sure the Deputy Leader would like to explain the work we've done there. Eye on devolution and anything on the KPIs you wish to pick up.
Okay, so we'll take those questions in between. However, then that way it won't get quite so confusing.
Yes, of course.
So let us go straight to item 4A with the devolution.
So, Chairman, thank you. The devolution, the paper is written for you. You can clearly see where we are with devolution, but just to give you a very brief recap, About a year ago, the government wrote or published a white paper, probably a bit more than a year ago now, explaining what it wished to do with devolution and how to level up through devolution across the country. I certainly, for those who know me well, I'm a great proponent of devolution. I believe all decision making should be as close to the public as you possibly can, and therefore that requires to devolve powers and finance from central government to local government. And by local government, I mean all levels of local government, not just the county level or even the district level, but also the parish level. I always remind, certainly my parish councillors, they are the third tier of local government, and therefore they should have responsibilities and powers to do certain things that maybe they currently don't enjoy, and we should be thinking about that. From that, there were 9 initial devolution deals. It's worth just noting at this stage that 50% of England, in some shape or form, is devolved. Nothing in the southeast thus far. Probably the furthest you'll come south would be Bristol over to the west and Cornwall, and further to south here is Suffolk, after Norfolk and Suffolk had their devolution deals. Everything in the southeast, which I would include Essex in that particular category for this, has yet to have any devolution deal or indeed any discussions around that. And it's starting to look a bit obvious from that point of view that there are some gaps in England where devolution hasn't taken place or conversations yet. It was at this point when we started to find out what the white paper was asking for and what it was prepared to offer that I met very quickly with the leaders of all the other districts and the 2 unitaries to discuss what we should do in Essex, because I couldn't conceive, as an ambitious county that we are, we should just stay as we are. Nothing should ever stand still in life. We should always look to move on and improve. But there's a basic homework question, and that is, how does this affect everyday residents' lives, and does it improve those lives? So far, and every time we've had those discussions, we can find great improvements to where they're currently, where situations currently exist at the moment to improve people's lives, whether that be in sharing services, whether it be in devolving money such as skills directly into the county of. And when I talk about the county, I'm talking about Greater Essex. You'll hear me talk about the county and Greater Essex. That's the 2 unitary authorities involved in this. But that's a political distinction. The county of Essex exists as a county of Essex geographically. And therefore, I think there's great advantage for people, certainly in skills, where we could look at directly improving the courses that are run through working directly with employers and our FE colleges and indeed our universities in devolving those skills to us, because we know through the economic approach where we think the county needs to be. And all of this, the county council and indeed all councils are enablers. So therefore we work with our partners both in business and in the universities and FE colleges to deliver that. That's one example. There are many other examples where devolution could help, transport being one, and you'll see this all laid out in the paper as well. My view is, until we start improving public transport, we are never going to hit net zero, because the options for people are poor in public transport, certainly in many parts of this county, not all, but certainly many parts of this county and certainly rural areas of this county, it is poor. And I don't see anything in the current where we're operating that's going to improve. So for me, having greater control of the financing of public transport and the operations, not running bus services, for instance, because companies can run those, but having greater control of the franchises means we can put money directly in where it's needed and not go into bidding wars as we currently do at the moment. I'm very clear as well that I don't believe, although we have to do it at the moment, that anyone should bid for money. If we believe in levelling up, money goes to where it's required the most, and evidence provides that, not just very good bid writing, which is where we have at the moment. I've said that both publicly, locally, and also nationally with my LGA hat on. I firmly believe that. If we get into devolution, a lot of that bidding war goes away, because you have the ability then as a combined authority under level 2 or level 3, which would see a directly elected mayor, having the ability to discuss directly with government what's required for your county or Greater Essex in this case. So we then progressed that with all the district leaders. We had workshops where I chaired one, and the leaders of the 2 unitary councils chaired work streams as well, to come to these conclusions so we could start a conversation properly and see what the benefits were. And at that stage, had anything come back saying there's no point doing this, we would have stopped. We have never reached that point of saying there's no point taking this forward any further. So that has now led to what we call the expression of interest. And for those who attended our last Cabinet meeting, knows that went through our Cabinet. It has gone through the Cabinet of Southend, and it's going to their full council on the 23rd of this month. And it is today, I think it goes to the Thurrock Cabinet, well, 13th, isn't it? It goes through the Thurrock Council Cabinet today, or certainly this week, for them to approve. Now, the expression of interest, if you read it, I'm sure you have read it, is a combination of level 2 and level 3. I think we all agreed level 1 gave us very little at all, which is what it was designed to do, if you ask me. And therefore, level 2 and level 3 is where we sit. Now, not everyone's in the same place. Everyone thinks we should do something. And I've been a great believer that finances will be the driver of devolution. I think it's fair to say that all councils casting their eye to the next 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 years are seeing some very big cliff edges coming on finance. So the way we operate has got to change, and devolution will be a great enhancer of change in those operations. I can go into details on that from the way I see it, if you wish me to later. So the expression of interest is written, which is very much open-ended around level 2 and level 3. There is no devolution application form you tick and sign and send to the government. So the expression of interest is completely homemade by Essex, Greater Essex. We always like to do things differently. We're an ambitious county, and we have done this differently. I think it's probably, if I look, and I will be corrected if I'm wrong, but talking around the country, the way we have approached this has been different as well. So full engagement with everyone to get their views and their expertise and their knowledge on board has really paid dividends to get it to this stage. And the expression of interest really is exactly that. It's a conversation opener with the government to say Essex is prepared to have Greater Essex prepared to have a conversation with government on a very sort of open basis as to what we would like, what you're prepared to offer, and what the benefits to the public will be as a result of that. And I'm very clear with all of this that I think we have to change to benefit the public. While the two-tier system works, I think it's very clunky, and I think we fall over ourselves, trip over ourselves. I'm fairly certain we are costing the taxpayers more money than we need to by having this current system. I also remind people as well, not this is about local government reform, it is not. It is about getting a combined authority with greater powers devolved to it and money devolved to it as well. But I just happen to feel that we could do things a lot better. And if nothing comes out of this in terms of devolution, if that doesn't happen, I think what will happen is councils talking together more about shared services and shared opportunities to reduce some of those costs to people. I do remind people that the two-tier system was created in 1974 when there was no internet, no such things called laptops or computers, mobile phones or anything at all. So while we run a system developed in 1974 with all that old way of working with a very much new modern way of working, we haven't kept pace in local government, and now it's time. I think we need to change, and devolution, I think, is a very strong way of doing that. Chair, perhaps I can leave that there. I'm sure there'll be many questions. I don't know if my other colleagues wish to add anything. They're all busy looking at their laptops, so I assume the answer to that is no. So there we are.
Okay, members, I know Anthony had got a couple of questions, so I'll go to Anthony first, if I may.
Sorry, excuse me. Many thanks for the early sight of the expression of interest. That was really, really helpful and a really good read. The success of this is dependent on the right deal being delivered, but we don't even know yet who the deal is between. And how do we as a scrutiny committee ensure that this is the right deal and not just any deal? And that's not very clear yet. So how do we get the right deal, and how do we ensure that we deliver the 8 assumptions or the 8 aspirations and deliver those with the right deal?
So, what a really good question. Thank you indeed, Councillor McGuig and Chair, through you. So the answer to that is we're not at a stage of a deal yet. Of course, we're just starting the conversation. How scrutiny plays a part in scrutiny absolutely must play a part in this. It cannot be the aspirations of 2 or 3 people. It has to be everyone working together. And whatever we come back with being scrutinised properly, that it's right. Remember the homework question, how does this benefit the members of the public? That is the only reason we're doing this. We're not doing it for councillors' benefit. We're not doing it for council's benefit. We're doing it for the public. We only exist to serve them. And as you almost hear me say, we don't have any money, nor does the government. We have the taxpayers' money. It's how we then spend that efficiently to maybe make sure they get a better deal. So to answer your question, what I've suggested to the chair of this committee is you might want to try and go into joint session with the scrutiny panels of Southend and Thurrock. Now, the reason I say that, because the bit I didn't say, and I should have said at the beginning, is the way the white paper is written, it only requires upper tier authorities to put in a deal. So I didn't like that. I wanted to make sure all our district colleagues were involved in this, and indeed our town and parish councils of the EALC will be briefed, have had some briefings on this, but much more detailed briefings will come shortly as well. So all forms of local government in Essex will have a say about this and be involved. We don't have to. So we could have just gone and said Southend, Thurrock and Essex just do a deal, that's it, and that would have been accepted. That's a terrible way of working. I would never do that. You know me, and that's not my style, so we're not doing that. However, we have to put the deal in because that's what the white paper is requiring. And therefore, I have suggested in terms of further scrutiny, you scrutinise jointly together because it would be a greater Essex deal. What we wouldn't want to do, I think anyway, is sort of start separating because I just want that for Southend, or I want that for Essex, or I want that for Dunmow. You know, we've got to make sure we do this together because we're talking about the greater Essex area. So that, I can't tell you to do that. That was my suggestion to the chair, and the chair may wish to discuss that further with you. What is important is that anything we come back with before anything is signed and a deal done, you will have your say in that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, you said during your introduction there, you were talking about this isn't about local government reform. But if it goes ahead at level 3, then we're effectively introducing a new level, a new tier of the authority. So is it not inevitable that unitary must follow if we go down this path?
Again, a very good question. That's not for me to say, that's for others to conclude. You're quite right, if we went down the initial stage, we are creating a 4th tier with an elected mayor and combined authority. But the reason for that is to have direct powers. So the government is very clear, it wishes to devolve to a body or a person. At the moment, there are 15 councils in Essex, include us all together, and that's 15 different people all trying 15 different things to try and get money out of government. The government's very clear it wants a conversation with an elected body, the combined authority, and or a mayor. So getting the power and the money transferred is the most important thing. This deal isn't about local government reform, but it'd be very wrong of me not to say that would be another conclusion you would come to. But that's not for me to say that. That's for everyone else to say that and say what is in it for the taxpayer, what is the benefits to the taxpayer. It might not be unitaries, it might be another form of government we come up with. Essex will find its way, but this particular deal is not about that at this stage. What it is about is getting those monies and those responsibilities and those powers that we currently don't enjoy. So, for instance, let's take an example of the A127. So the A127 is a road that was taken out of the main transport route and detrunked back in the 70s or 80s, wasn't it, I think? So quite a long time ago, and given to the local councils. In our case, the majority is us, but there's a bit at the end which belongs to Southend. We are never going to have the money to do to that road what is required. We simply don't. It's a main road. It's a major economic route as well, with all the development on either side of it as you go down or up to Southend. And therefore, we're never going to be able to achieve that. A mayor would be able to speak directly to the Secretary of State for Transport and or the Prime Minister and make that case and get that money. That is the difference. I can't do that, and I've tried. I can write endless letters in all of this. So can the leaders of Southend. We can work in, and we've had workshops, and we've had task force, and we're still no further forward. A mayor has the ability to do that, and that's proven with other mayors around the country. That's what we want to achieve.
Let me bring somebody in on the Zoom system. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chairman.
We've got a picture of you, but you're sideways.
You're doing very well there, Ivan, standing on the wall like that.
I don't know what's happened there. At least I'm pointing to the left, on my left anyway.
Gravity.
Yes, Chairman. Just the first comment to make is Councillor Bentley's mentioned a few times that we would have greater powers over our transport, including buses, and he mentions franchising. He will be aware that now we have an enhanced partnership in place. We could go for franchising anyway without having a mayor. You just have to contact the Secretary of State. So that's just one comment I'd like to make and see and ask him if he agrees with that. The main question, other two questions I've got is on the timetable of the consultation. for going through the devolution process, it mentions in winter 2023-24 a public consultation. Now that consultation, I just wondered if that's set in stone, because that consultation with the public actually starts over a Christmas period where lots of people will have lots of other things on their mind, and it's only a very short consultation. I just wondered if there's any flexibility that when we get to that stage where the public can give their views and their say, that there's some flexibility on that timescale and the particular time that consultation's taken place. My next part is on the governance. Now, if the leader and his team are now discussing with government and submitting their memorandum of interest, they surely are submitting a governance model in that at the same time. And I wonder if he'd give us an idea of what will the governance model look like. It refers in the Essex Leaders and Chief Executives paper that it's a model in line with East Midlands, and it says about weighted voting and stuff. I just wonder if you could give us an idea of what role the district councillors would play in a future devolution process, and what role Essex County councillors would play in a future devolution process within that governance process. Thank you, Chairman.
So I'll take those in order. In terms of buses, yeah, you can get franchises now, but that doesn't go far enough for me. What this is about is public subsidy into bus routes and into all forms of public transport. But until that happens, we're not going to get people on buses and out of cars while it remains too complicated and too expensive to go by bus. That needs to change, and we need to simplify that. So if you can come in by bus and it's much cheaper than driving your car, parking and all the congestion that goes with it, people aren't going to make that switch. And that's why I think devolution gives us the ability to do that. And that goes, as far as I understand it, beyond what the government's currently offering. You can get that as a part of a public transport, part of a transport deal. So I'll be after that. In terms of the governance side of things, so you mentioned the timetabling. At the moment, that's a suggestion. So the consultation is we've put that in at the moment as we see it. That can change, that can be moved around. We haven't even started a conversation with the government yet, which comes on to the other governance side of this question you asked. There is no plan. What we're looking at is maybe what's happened elsewhere and what the weighted vote will be elsewhere, but nothing is arranged. So I can't comment because we haven't even started a conversation. Once we start the conversation, we can come back and say, this is what we've discussed so far, this is what the government's looking at. If you look at some of the other models, well, of course, in terms of district councils, technically they have no role under the white paper. I don't think that's right, which you've heard me say, and I think district councils should have a say in all of this, and indeed could make up a combined authority as well. But we're not at that stage yet. This is an opener. This is basically saying, here's our opening gambit, have a conversation with you to see what that looks like. So at the moment, we've used other examples of what's going on to give you some examples of what's happening, but nothing is agreed yet. So the county council clearly would have a role in that, whether it's weighted against, so because we're much bigger than the two unitaries, that we had, let's say, 3 votes and they have 1 each, for example. That's something we need to discuss, but that would always put the advantage into the county council. And I want to think of this as Greater Essex, where we all have a clear say, not just think about our bit of Essex, but think about all of Greater Essex. So what happens in Thurrock is as important to me as what happens in Tendring, because that's the way I see the county and all other areas, by the way, I said very quickly, of the county, to see it as a whole and how we can move forward as a whole. But what it does mean as well is more localised projects, which you heard me talk about the A127, but there are other projects that members of Parliament would want to have, leaders want to have in different areas. Suddenly these become possible in a way they've never been possible before because there isn't the money going around. Once you have money devolved, the ability not to have to bid in for grants, direct conversations with government, and it's clear it wants to do this. I think the Labour Party, as you'll know, Councillor Henderson, is also on this trajectory as well, and they want to go for further devolution. So whatever happens, this is coming, which is why I want us to be ahead of the curve before any other current government or future government decides to start imposing this. I want to be ahead of the curve on this, and we set our own agenda. But at the moment, there is no agenda, there is no governance. We're waiting for that conversation. As soon as that takes place, we will then make sure we come back and have that conversation in scrutiny, and in a way I hope maybe across all the 3 upper tier authorities. Have I missed anything? Is that answerable?
Because Councillor Henderson, we're pleased to say that you're round the right way now.
Chairman, could I
Did you want to come back on any of that?
just briefly, because Councillor Bentley mentioned the Labour policy on devolution, and he will be aware, because I've mentioned to him before, if there is a new Labour government in the future, they are not going to be so prescriptive by saying that you have to have a mayor to actually devolve the powers that Councillor Bentley mentioned. So there is a difference between the two parties. Yes, he's right. I think all parties want devolution, but some are not so prescriptive on that you have to have a mayor in place, which is a bit of blackmail, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I should just think, so I say every opportunity I get the chance, if we had a mayoral deal here, that mayor would not be me. I'm very clear that I would not be running for that position, which gives me then quite a lot of freedom to negotiate this, because I'm not trying to carve out a job. So I tell you that here in a very public meeting, so you can then say to other people, should they say, well, that's old Bentley boy trying to get himself a job in the future? Absolutely not the case. I would never be a candidate for mayor if there was one in Essex.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vance.
Thank you very much. Could I just pick up a couple of, maybe 3 points, if I may, Kevin? We were given a presentation to show us the 3 different levels and the 8 different functional criteria. Having looked at that and looked at everyone's Essex aspirations and goals, it would appear to me, and I wonder if you could either say whether it's right or wrong, that when we've looked at the different levels of responsibilities against those 8 criteria, it would appear to me, and I don't know if it would appear to you, that unless we go for level 3, some of the things you've been talking about today, transportation, do not fall into level 2, and therefore we could not get those responsibilities for those areas. So it would indicate to me that level 3 has to be the level we want to go for if we want to achieve our everyone's Essex aspirations. So I'm querying whether or not you actually agree on that, and whether we are really steering to level 3. And if we don't go there, for instance, under the transport that you talked about, it says, for instance, unless you go for level 3, consolidation of existing core transport funding and road maintenance, etc., unless you choose level 3, you will not get the responsibility for doing that. And also, I know the bus franchising falls into level 2 as well. So that's question 1. And the other one that I noted on that particular presentation that we had, it said at the top of it, if you go for level 3, unless all of the whole of Essex buys into it, it will not be accepted. Could you confirm if that is the case? For instance, if Southend decide that we're not going to go for devolution, we're going to stick as a unitary authority, or Thurrock did the same thing, would that mean that our hopes to become devolved would fail? And the third one that falls out of, and you probably haven't got any clue as to what this will be in the future, but all of this will be about bringing money from central government to devolution. How would we have any indicators that the amount that would bring from central government through devolution would be enough to achieve everyone's Essex and a level 3 aspirations of all those 8 functions? How do we know if level 3 would produce, for instance, give us £1 billion, that £1 billion is enough, is what I'm trying to get at. And we do not want to go down the devolution route to find that central government money that we came from was not sufficient to fulfil the criteria and the aspirations that we got in everyone's Essex. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Brilliant questions again. Thank you for that, Councillor Vance. And Chair, if I may. So level 3, yes, personally, I think level 3 is what we should be aiming for all the reasons that you've articulated. But I'm one voice in this, so I cannot and would not dictate to people, but certainly level 3 is where I think we need to be. The government's made it quite clear that level 3 is where they want the country to go in terms of devolution, and by some shape or form, whether it's directly elected county leaders we have in Norfolk and Suffolk, or directly elected mayors, then that is starting to happen. the government's made it quite clear it wants to deal with an elected body or an elected person directly responsible. We have this already with the PFCC, of course. I mean, it's for police and fire, but nonetheless, it's directly elected by the whole of Greater Essex in one job. So this sort of form already exists. But that person is elected directly by the population of Essex, who can then be unelected if they do not fulfil what they want to achieve, what they say they're going to achieve. So that's the greater incentive, where, of course, no one elects me as the leader of Essex except you, or first of all, my group, and then you as councillors, but the public don't elect me as leader. I suppose you could argue no one directly elects the Prime Minister either, but nonetheless, we're not directly elected. So that person has greater accountability, in the same way that the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner has greater responsibility, greater authority for their area, because they are directly elected with a clear mandate from the public to deliver. And I think that's quite a powerful message. So it's my view, level 3, I think many of my colleagues would agree, but not everyone does at the moment. So I don't dictate, I simply try and persuade and put the argument across. And when we come to the expression of interest conversations with the government, that'll be the case. Well, people will have their views. But what I think everyone is clear on, we need something more than we've got at the moment. I think that is quite a clear message we're getting from all of our colleagues, whether at district or unitary. If the other two unitaries don't play ball, so as it currently stands, yeah, we'd find it difficult to progress. However, I'll be very honest, because I think this is so important. If that were the case, and we're not at that place, I have to be honest with you, I think both unitaries are seeing, as I've just told you, a form of devolution is important. But if we can't agree and they decide to pull away, I would ask that Essex could go it alone if that was the case, because it's that important to the public as far as I'm concerned. But we're not at that, I must emphasise, we're not at that place now. You asked me a direct question, you have a direct answer to that. We're not. We're all working together very hard to make sure we get this. And I think that's great credit to my colleagues in Thurrock and Southend, but also to the district colleagues as well. Money from government. So we estimate, if you go on the current trajectory of other devolution deals, one thinks of East Midlands, one thinks of North Yorkshire being the two most recent ones that came after Norfolk and Suffolk. We think, given our size and scale, it would be just over £1 billion, spread over 20 years, I hasten to add. So it's not a £1 billion cheque and off you go and have fun. It's over 20 years. But that is the core funding, if you like. That's the funding that would come in as a result of this. I mentioned before that a mayor, a combined authority, could then have negotiations directly with other secretaries of state on projects. Now, we know this because Leaders and Chief Execs had a presentation from Ben Hatchen. Other mayors are available, he said quickly, but Ben Hatchen, who's the mayor of Tees Valley. And he made it very plain to us that council leaders, and this is absolutely true, I certainly am one, and others have been or are leaders here, will know that it is not possible for me to pick up the phone to Secretary of State and please can I have this, I'd like it now. That just doesn't exist. It revolves lots of letter writing, conversations, if you're lucky enough to have them, with no firm commitments. A mayor has the ability to pick up the phone, as he told us, and have those direct conversations. And particularly on economic growth, you'll have seen what's happened in these devolved areas with the mayors. You've seen recently what's happened in Manchester. They have a transport deal. For those who read the paper recently in London would have seen that Andy Burnham is now on a global stage on economic development, in a way that perhaps a council leader couldn't do. As a mayor, he's going to America and promoting the Greater Manchester area directly to other companies to come in and invest. Yes, could I do that? Yes, I probably could try, but I wouldn't be very successful because, you know, who am I? A mayor brings that clout. So that's why I think it's hugely important. And you've seen other great benefits being brought in to places like Bristol and also West Midlands, as you'll see in North Yorkshire shortly, as you'll see in Norfolk and Suffolk and elsewhere. So I think it has the ability to get that core funding in, what the government's going to agree with you to certain things to be able to achieve. But then there's other monies we could directly apply for. And I think, as we currently sit, it takes you away from this bidding process that we currently all have to go into, the levelling up bids and that sort of thing. Some successful, some not successful. All are very good, but actually evidence needs to guide that. The mayor can produce the evidence, the mayor can have that direct conversation. So I think the power and the money are unlimited when it comes to the possibilities for the people of Essex. And that's why I think it's a good idea, because I think we can have a brighter future for them.
Could I have a supplementary? Yes, if I may just follow up with that. Picking up what Councillor Henderson said about the programme and the consultation with the public, it's just occurred to me that you keep talking about we're doing everything for the public, and that's quite right. At some point, there will be a consultation with the public. What would happen if the public said no?
It stops. Just stops. Because why would you want to fight against the public in this case? However, we've yet to explain to the public what this means. And why would the public care is the first question I want to say. Do they care about how we run the council? Yes, they care about their council tax bills. They care about the services we provide. So on the day-to-day running, they've got their own lives to lead, haven't they? And it's a struggle for many people as we currently sit with the current climate we live in. And just getting through their daily lives is the most important thing in their family. Quite right, the most important thing. That's why they elect us to do this kind of work. We've yet to have that conversation because we've yet to have a decision, we've yet to have a deal that comes through that you are content with, that we can take to the public. And then we explain to the public in as many ways and as simply as possible to explain to the public what this means, what the benefits would be as we see them. And there may be people who are against it, let's be honest, and they will put their own view, then the public will decide. That consultation is hugely important. But if it's 100% absolutely no, we don't want this, then why would you want to fight the public in that space?
No, I was thinking, what if it was, I hate to use the word Brexit, but what if it was
52-48?
Yeah, 48-52.
So we don't get to that situation, because look how well that worked out last time.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Goody.
Well, thank you, and good morning to everybody. Maybe a slight rerun of Councillor Dance's questions, but the thing that concerned appeared to me was that you mentioned that there's obviously 15 different authorities that would be involved in this, and it was around how you make sure that you can get consensus within those. I can think of one that may, at the moment, that may well not have that in its current setup. But of course, what happens if you don't achieve that consensus and there is one outlier that creates a bit of a problem? Do you then overrule them? Do you then find that you have to be dictatorial in that process, which clearly wouldn't work or wouldn't help in terms of a smooth process?
So just a very good question, thank you, Chair. Through you, the current white paper doesn't require there to be consensus amongst the districts, if that's what you're referring to. It does require there to be some form, as I've explained before, some form of consensus with the unitary upper tier authorities. And I've explained that should that not carry on, I have a clear view what we think we should be asking for, but we're certainly nowhere near that stage yet. So therefore, it requires there to be the three upper tier authorities who will do the negotiation. So far, I would say no one has come up and said, we're totally opposed to this. I think everyone, and I will check, officers will jump in if I got it wrong, everyone in some shape or form has agreed that the expression of interest should go forward and we should have that conversation. Because actually, why wouldn't you? There's nothing to lose in a conversation. So why would you want to block that even before it starts? No one has. But to answer your question directly, as much as I do and want to and will continue to engage with our district colleagues, we don't require their consensus to move this forward. But I wouldn't want to go ahead if people are violently against it. I've not heard that, and I'd like to listen to the argument why they would be.
Thank you. Could I ask just a second brief question? You also mentioned the role of scrutiny in this and rolling that out to those other authorities. Have you yet had any thoughts about how that's achievable? Because to engage with the scrutiny processes in each of the authorities, including the districts, would be quite an important part to make sure that there's a reasonable understanding by their members and therefore the public by default.
Again, good question. Well, first of all, it's not for me to dictate how scrutiny works, because that would be totally inappropriate under the Local Government Act, and scrutiny must be independent of the administration. But I could make suggestions to you, and my suggestions would be that you would combine those on the scrutiny panel from this panel and others to represent the county along with Southend and Thurrock. And you might want to invite representatives, not all of them, but from some of the districts, maybe some from the north, some from the south, whatever you want to do it, a representative to sit on that scrutiny panel. So you become a super scrutiny panel. There's no law says you can't, there's no law says you can. So my view is if no one's stopping you, just go and do it. So I think on that basis, it's for you to determine how that would work. I can't, and I would never tell you, but my suggestion would be that would be a way to proceed. And you would want to involve district colleagues by asking for reps. It's no different to how we do Transport East, for instance, where, again, under a sub-regional transport body, there is no role for district councils. But as the chair of that, and I should declare the interest, I chair it, by the way, as the chair of that, I set up a long time ago involvement by districts where each of the counties sends a district rep to sit on the Transport East board. That works very well. There's no reason this couldn't work the same way.
Thank you.
Good. Let me bring somebody in from on the video. Councillor Pond.
Thank you, Chairman. On the question of a joint scrutiny, I think that is an excellent idea. I've advocated it myself. And I hope the next meeting of the Scrutiny Board, which Ray Gooding chairs, will consider the best way of establishing a joint scrutiny function and getting on with it, whether or not the timing of that dictates that it should be after the expression of interest has gone in. I think it's probably true, but certainly after the elections and during the course of negotiations. The one thing I was going to ask separately is the elephant in the room in many ways is finance, of course, and I wonder whether the leader would talk us through not only the governance but the financial governance affairs of a joint devolved body, and in particular how a mayor would or would not have tax raising powers and how that would be applied. Would it be a precept issued to each of the authorities, or would it be by some other method?
Thank you, Councillor Pond, and through you, the Chair. So again, that's yet to be determined with the government of how you would do that, and there are models that currently exist where a mayor does have precepting authorities, as in the same way the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner has precepting abilities at the moment. So I can only talk hypothetically, because we're not there yet, and by other examples of what could happen. And I said that's up for negotiation. So what I'm saying is not a commitment. It is not a done deal, because there is no done deal. So I can just give you some views as to where I see it and where other examples are. So for instance, under the current model, we probably would see the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner role subsumed into the mayoral role and a combined authority. Now, what happens elsewhere, not in all cases, but in a lot of the bigger cases where there are bigger areas for which Essex is a large area. So let's say the West Midlands, and let's say London as an example. The role of Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner would be a deputy mayor role that would be appointed by the mayor. So while you would lose one precepting job, you would actually gain one through the mayor. So it's like for like. And of course, the precepting of that depends on services the mayor is then allocated through the powers the mayor then receives from government. So we can't be prescriptive about, as we sit here, about what that precept would be, because it depends on the responsibilities that are devolved from government. And so we don't know yet. And we wouldn't get the same thing as the London mayor, because that's a whole different mayoralty in its own right, and probably close to something such as the East Midlands, North Yorkshire, or indeed possibly the West Midlands as well. I even hesitate to say Greater Manchester, because again, Manchester in its own right, like London, is a very powerful mayor. There's no reason the Essex mayor should not be powerful, but it depends on the responsibilities. So I can't give you a precise answer on that, because I simply don't know at the moment, and it would fall out for what the negotiations are. However, that governance and finance question is something, again, we have to thrash out to bring back to you here to say that is what the proposition is, this is what it would look like, and what it does to district councils, and indeed, local parish councils as well, with precepting rights, what that does there to them as well. And that may then possibly spark the further conversation about what happens to how we govern Essex. But as we currently sit, that is not part of this conversation. The deal we get is either for a mayor or a combined authority. That's what we're aiming for, and whether a combined authority has the right to have a precept, again, is part of those negotiations. We didn't have a mayor model. So all of this is a bit up in the air at the moment until we can come back. And I'm hoping in the not too distant future, when we've had those negotiations, I can be much more precise with all of you about what this means. At the moment, these are just views that I hold, that other colleagues hold, and some aren't quite in that space yet, and also using previous examples of other mayoral deals.
Thank you.
Okay. I've got quite a number on the list. I think I've got 6 to go so far, so I'll close the list at that point because time starts marching on. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Kevin. Good presentation. Can I just clarify? I think Marshall asked the question I was going to ask, but if I could just enlarge on that regarding Southend and Thurrock. Obviously, discussions are going on. I assume they are surmountable, or are they really rigid? Because obviously, if they don't join in, then we don't go any further.
So at the moment, it's very open, a very good discussion. No one is opposing the expression of interest as I see it at the moment. Everyone's wanting to have that conversation. And whether that changes as the conversation goes on, I simply don't know at the moment. All I know is that I don't think I've seen a level of collaboration between all levels of local government in Essex as I'm seeing at the moment. Everyone wants this county, Greater Essex, to succeed, and I think they see this as a vehicle to succeeding. Once we stop thinking about just the road we live in and think about the county we live in, by that I mean Greater Essex, then I think we have greater clarity of where we can be and what we can achieve for future generations. All I know is it works at the moment, but it doesn't work efficiently enough. This is a game changer.
Thank you. Chairman, just one more little minor point. It might be the wrong. Ringing the bell for Harlow, if you like. On page 17, you talk about the universities of Essex, Anglia, and University of Whittle College. You don't mention Harlow College.
Well, no, all colleges in that. So the Whittle College, of course, is a university, which you have ARU based at Harlow. In fact, if you go there, you'll find a plaque with Kevin Bentley's name written on it. If you go to the Vehicle Electric Centre, you'll see one with the Deputy Leader's plaque on it. We're slowly, surely getting our plaques in Harlow, literally planting our plaques in Harlow. So it's all colleges. In this case, it's universities that are referring to.
Black and white.
Yeah, sure. No part, rather like no one being left behind, no part of Essex is left out of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the journey to get to where we have bringing people around the table, how important has the infrastructure ask and the potential to make infrastructure decisions been? Is it one element of it, or has it been the overriding thing? Because in the county, I think we all want improved infrastructure, and maybe in recent months and recent years, perhaps some areas of the county perhaps have done better than others, maybe?
Yeah, so again, very good question. Thank you. Very good questions today. Really good session. Thank you. Chair, so to answer that question, infrastructure is a key element of this. I'm a great proponent of spatial planning. You heard me say many times, and I'll say it again here, I think the way we currently do planning in England is crazy. So what we have is housing targets to build houses, and then everything else is thought about as we go along. We must plan better, and infrastructure is a firm part of that. Getting roads, and roads will change as we change because of the kind of vehicles we're going to have in the future, and also better public transport. It's always been my desire to have an RTS rapid transit system that goes not just in Colchester, but right across the north of Essex, right across the Stansted Airport. You can multiply that down the A127 rapid transit system there to get people to the airport quicker than maybe just the train, and across other parts of the county as well. But you can start having that conversation, and by the collaboration we've had together of all the districts and unitaries, we're starting to have those conversations. So we start talking about the place called Greater Essex, not just our bit of it. Well, our bit of it is important, but if you just talk about that, you ignore the bits around you. Now, we did try with the duty to cooperate, didn't we? And that sort of worked, a bit like the curate saying, good in parts, not good everywhere. This becomes different. It means you have that global conversation. And what's important to Braintree is important to Tendring, is important to Southend, is important to Harlow, because then you start back joining up these places in a much better way than we currently do at the moment. That is the strength of this deal.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple more questions. The leader refers a fair bit to the infrastructure and taking control of transport and infrastructure. He will be aware that the process of actually gaining that control is very long and drawn out. If you look at Andy Burnham, he was elected in 2017, and probably the same for Steve Rotherham, and they're only just getting permission to take on bus franchising. So there is a problem and a very big delay on actually achieving those infrastructure controls. But my other question to Councillor Bentley is, why the hurry? Why are we looking to get a statutory order in place in spring, summer 2024 when we could possibly have a new government after that, which is not, like I said, not holding councils to the line that they have to have a mayor in place to get these extra controls. What the policy could be is that leaders know best. And is he absolutely wedded to the mayoral side of things? Because Suffolk went for a level 2 because they didn't want that added layer of bureaucracy. Is he not happy if everything went that way to actually accept a level 2?
So thank you. Again, good questions, Chair, good challenging questions. In terms of the infrastructure, yeah, well, I think, these mayoralties were created quite some time ago. We've learned a lot from that. And it was part of the conversations we'd put there on the table now, that we'd want that, not to wait another 6-7 years down the line. Those mayoralties were created under a different set of criteria. Now we have the white paper, which is much clearer, and I think it gives us much more largesse for those conversations. So I wouldn't even wait for that time, because I'm ambitious. I want to get these things done now, and therefore be part of the negotiations to have those powers in. And why the hurry? Because I'm ambitious. Why wait? I'm not a politician. Been here 2 years as leader, I don't kick the can down the road for someone else to pick up later. We get it done now. Why not now? And who knows, Labour may come in as the government. If they come in, they might not be as ambitious as we are in Essex. And I'm very ambitious, like I hope all of us are in this room, to get these things done. So I'd like to get the negotiations underway. Am I wedded to a mayor? I've been quite clear. I think mayors are the best way of going. And I don't want to deal like anybody else's deal. I want a deal that's unique to Greater Essex, because we're ambitious. We are unique as a county. Therefore, I think we need to express that. And you've heard me say in my speeches before that if the county council isn't ambitious for an ambitious public, then what's the point of the county council? And that's why I'm pushing this, because why wait and why wait and why wait? Now is the time to strike. Now is the time that we are going to do well for this county, and they and their children and their children's children will benefit from the decisions we're taking now, whether it be levelling up or devolution. The public of this county over the next 100 years will benefit from what we're doing right now.
Councillor McCrory.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, my first question would be about Thurrock. I just wonder what the leader can say about a cast iron guarantee that they wouldn't bring any financial liability to the wider Essex residents in terms of paying off their debt with an increased precept on the rest of Essex. And secondly, he may not be in a position to answer this at this stage in the process, but perhaps if not, when he comes back again, could he give us a lot more clarity about how an elected mayor and cabinet will actually work, and what the makeup of that cabinet will be, and how they make their decisions which directly affect the constituent districts. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So, again, good questions. Chair, through you. So, Thurrock, no, I can't say too much. All I've been very clear about, there would be no deal where we're inheriting a debt from that point of view. But I can't get much beyond that at the moment, because we're still waiting for various things to be announced from Thurrock. It'd be very unfair without Thurrock being here to have those conversations, other than say that we would not be inheriting a debt in any shape or form on this. That is very clear, and I think we've been very clear with government on that. The way it would work, so again, we can only use examples elsewhere. The cabinet tend to be made up of leaders from councils, and deputy mayors tend to be appointed directly. Bearing in mind, this is not all responsibilities. I wouldn't expect the mayor to be responsible for collecting or disposing of waste. I wouldn't expect them to do highways maintenance. I would expect them to do much more strategic work that's around economic development, the whole of the county, working with other districts as well to make sure that's delivered on the ground. Infrastructure, transport, all the things you've seen in the paper, much more strategic. The County Council is a strategic body, but not for the whole of Greater Essex. And that's where I think the game changer comes in, that suddenly we can start having those conversations about how we improve mobility, how we improve job creation, not just for young people, but for older people as well. Skills is for life, not just for those coming out of school and college. How we're developing that economic plan within the skills we're doing. We do that, but it's the government doesn't allow us to do it properly enough, and therefore, I always use the example of Harlow. Harlow College and Stansted Airport the academy there on aviation came about because I had to have a cup of coffee at the time with the then chairman of the CELOP, with the then MD of Stansted, myself. And I said to the MD, what's your biggest problem here? It was just after MAG had taken over, and he said, I can't employ aviation engineers locally. We have changed that. Now, we did that, but it was a struggle to get there. A mayor wouldn't have that struggle. A mayor would just make that happen. Think of that around the county. How many times we can do that and improve skills. That's what a mayor can achieve, what a mayor can do. Without all the aggregate parts that go with that, and the letter writing and the pleading and the, is everyone happy with this? They can just make that decision. That is the game changer. But on the services that councils deliver on a day-to-day basis, brilliant services, that would cover all of those constituent parts.
Thank you. Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Kevin. As this moves forward, can all the work be done in-house, or will we need to bring in consultants? I asked this question, obviously, at a time of constrained budgets.
No, unless something changes, we have an expert team. Just sitting to not my immediate right, but just the one after, is a gentleman that co-wrote the white paper. And we persuaded Mr. Walker to come and work with us, and he graciously accepted. And therefore, I've probably got some of the greater expertise in the country than any other part of the country going into devolution. I also have people like Mr. Pullister next door to me and his team, and Sarah as well, who are working fantastically on this with one common cause. As I sit here, and I can't absolutely promise, because you can never give a cast iron promise the sun's coming up tomorrow, you just hope it's going to. But as I sit here, I don't think we need to engage other people. We've got the will, the expertise, both politically and officer-wise here, and also other councils as well, to make this happen.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Henry.
Oh, he's gone.
He disappeared. Okay, Councillor Pond.
No, Chairman, I don't need another go.
Okay, okay. I just had one question, see if...
Councillor Henry's back.
Councillor Henry, you had your hand up. Okay, right. Fair enough. Easily done. Okay, I just had a couple of small points. With regards to infrastructure, one of the biggest issues I feel in the county is you can travel east-west quite easily. Travelling north-south becomes a problem, whether that be by road or by rail. Will the franchising enable us to look at the rail system to improve that? And how do you see that work?
So you're quite right. Those travelling by road east to west might have a slightly different view, depending on where you are. The A414 is a good road, but not, it could be better. And the A120, of course, halfway in the middle is a country lane. So they might have a view, but I take the point. All of our roads, all of our infrastructure needs improving, okay? We're still running on a system from way back when, with more cars, more vehicles, more transportation, more need for mobility than we had 40 or 50 years ago. That does need to change. The direct question on the trains is no, as it currently stands, Network Rail and the train operators clearly have a role and a say in how they operate on those. However, a mayor, I think, could have great influence on that. So we wouldn't take over the running of the trains. I think that would probably be a step too far at the moment. If we introduce systems like RTSs, then we might. In the same way you've got London Underground and London Transport, that may well happen. But on mainline services, I think a mayor has great influence on all of that. And maybe you wouldn't have all the negotiations. It's taken us this long to build what was once called the Springfield Halt, now called Bewley Park, and thank goodness that's now happening. But as a young journalist, we'll see how long ago that was, I wrote stories about the Springfield Halt, and here we are 40 years later, and suddenly we're going away with it. Who wants to wait 40 years? You need to wait no more than 4 hours to get this underway. Picking up the phone, you could do that, start a conversation, and within a year or two, you could perhaps be further down the line to getting it done. So no, we wouldn't run trains, but a great influence by the mayor, I think, is powerful, and the mayor's voice would be very powerful in these situations. It's all about influence and power in these situations. You put that in the hands of someone directly elected by every resident of this county, and that is real power.
Okay, thank you. I've often said that if Anne Boleyn was to come back to Rochford, she'd still know her way round. So, anyway, I think that covers all the questions. Okay, let us move on. Item 4B, Appendix 2, levelling up, 1 year on. impact report to follow. Well, we've had the report.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So you have all had the report. That was sent out at the end of last week, and I have got some hard copies here that were left over from the parliamentary reception on last Wednesday. So if anybody wants some, do pick them up before you leave. I'm not going to say too much about the detail in the report because obviously you can all read that. And I'm not sure you'd get much more out of it in terms of me just picking out some random numbers and initiatives. What I did want to do, though, before we maybe take some questions, which I think is where the real value is in this session, is just to highlight the way in which the Levelling Up programme has been approached and what that's meant around some of the working practices. So certainly internally as a council, we have, I think, made really good strides over the past year in terms of joining up the different departments. And that's not just been on an initiative to initiative basis. There is much more cross-portfolio conversations that are taking place all around the drive in terms of the general ethos about levelling up. And there have been some really good examples, obviously, where some of the funding has been able to use, some of the initiatives that different areas have been very keen to progress with. In education, you've had the year of reading, we've got the year of numbers that's starting. You can see how we've started to use our library service to not only deliver some of the outreach work in terms of literacy, but actually to think about how that service could be part of the holiday and activity programme. They've been going out into some of the more deprived areas, working with not just the providers, but also very closely with those schools, particularly the primary schools where there have been issues with literacy. So we've got much better joined up working as an organisation internally, I think. And the second point, which is along the same lines, but is with partners. Now, look, we're local government, we talk partnership working all the time. I think we've probably all seen that to varying degrees as to when it's worked really well and when it's basically been a line that we trot out at the appropriate time. But certainly what we've seen through this agenda is much closer working with our partners, whether that be through the health service, whether it be through some of the voluntary sector. Certainly on the Essex Partners Board, we've got a big drive now around work opportunities, whether that is apprenticeships, if it's work experience, if it's how we can target recruitment from less diverse communities or from the harder to reach groups. And we're looking at what we can do now collectively. So it may be that you could come to the county council for a week's work experience and then you could go to one of our partner organisations. That's still very new, but I don't think we would have had those levels of discussion before. What we're seeing is where a number of different organisations are already doing stuff in this area, that in actual fact being able to bring it together, that the outcomes can be so much better and so much stronger. And then just finally, the role of business. We've had some really good success stories in the last few months where we've managed to start to cement some of those relationships with the private sector. So we had Penguin Books who sponsored the Winter Reading Challenge. We've done some outreach work with HSBC around some of the financial literacy. And there are other examples, some of which are in the document. And certainly as we turn our attention to this year, that's very much a focus for me. And one of the really positives that came out of last Wednesday was some of the approaches that came forwards to me and to others to ask about how we can cement some of the business boards and how they can all work more closely together to make sure that again that we're joined up and that we're getting much better outcomes. So it's been a really successful year. As we turn to obviously 2023 now, the focus is going to be on the cohorts. You'll recall that we split it out between people and place. Last year, it was very much about the places that have been identified as having targeted either intervention or convening or working together. And now it is about the cohorts. So if you haven't been involved much in the programme to date, I expect that will change this coming year because the cohorts, as a quick reminder, the working families, where around 80% of the household income is through paid employment, children on free school meals, all age, SEND and mental health, and then the so-called NEETs, the 16 to 25-year-olds who've been unemployed for 6 months or more. They are in all of our divisions. Wherever you represent, these people are there. So the initiatives that we bring forwards will be relevant to all of you. And you will also start to see that where you have been involved on the place side, that we will begin to layer some of that work because there's some obvious opportunities there. I'll leave it there, Chairman. As I say, I think probably the biggest benefit will be on questions, which I'm obviously happy to take and answer accordingly.
Okay. The first person who got their hand up was Councillor Henry. He's shaking his head again. His hand is up. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Fleming.
Thank you, Jim. Morning, Louise. I'm glad you mentioned work experience. I think that is, it's important to focus on that because a lot of children from less advantaged households, they don't have access to work experience that, more children from more middle class homes, their parents are slightly more pushy. So I think that would be a great thing if we could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not even just that they don't have those connections. They also, and we know this from some of the workshops that we've done, it's about making opportunities not just physically available to them, but so that they're actually aware of them in the first place in many cases. You're right, if you've got professional parents and you've got parents who, move in different circles, that very often it's not just about them getting new work experience, it's actually some of those conversations at home that can really, empower the young people to see what opportunities are there in life. And if you don't have that, then part of that is, for us, is to see how we can start to push that forward. So it is about, and that's why I think working with the businesses is so important, because it's about what they can do, some of the outreach work, and this is where it comes back to the fact that it's not all about the county council doing it, it's actually working in partnership and encouraging others, but also through the schools. And there was actually a project in Harlow on Friday, which I went to visit, where 3 of the secondary schools went to the library, and we had UK Power Networks, who's another one of our partners. They were there talking about all of the different opportunities that they have in their company to Year 9 students. So it's that kind of thing as well, where we can really broaden opportunities as well as an understanding of what's there.
Thank you. I think it was PAF last Thursday, was it, that we heard about the Essex Opportunities Panel and Project Jigsaw. I mean, that's all brilliant stuff. Yeah, good work. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chairman. And having taken note of what the leader said in his opening remarks about this is going to be a long-term thing to actually put a lot of these things right, because there are a lot of problems, and we know that as councillors within our own areas. For instance, I mean, when we're talking about Level Up, you say that to 83 families within Tendron who are now in temporary accommodation because they've got nowhere to live. Some of them actually have been moved out of poor standard rented accommodation, which is not fit to be lived in. So when we're actually looking at down on at the grassroots level of what Levelling Up needs and how much work needs to be done, that's just one example. And what I wanted to ask the Deputy Leader is, how are you've had this presentation at Parliament saying about all the things you're doing. How are you evaluating the things that you are doing to see what the outcomes are? Where are the case studies of some of the families that are at that level where they really do need to be levelled up and see some kind of equality of life standards as other people, which other people take for advantage? And on the work experience side of things, what evaluation have you done across all schools? Because I don't see that on every school, that every school's offering that work experience opportunities. That's all right giving one example, but we need that across the whole of Essex, where young people have got access to work experience. And I'm going to keep banging the drum, because I saw a decision come out the other day about helping young people with careers advice, sending them out a magazine or an attachment that they can go through and look at. It still doesn't substitute the situation where you've got careers advisors in schools helping young people, interviewing them and finding out what their needs are and looking at how they can access the opportunities that are available within our areas. And another one is the expense of transport. There's still barriers to people taking on opportunities because of the cost of transport. Thank you.
Yeah, so they're all good points. I'll try and answer them all together, and then please pick me up if I miss any. I mean, in terms of the transport piece, I know this is something that you flagged before, and I think we saw from the previous discussion, just listening to some of those questions there around where some of the opportunities can lie in the future. I'm certainly not pretending that we have all of the answers, and certainly not just us as the County Council. That's where that partnership working is so important. But, certainly some of those discussions around Devo, which are very much centred on accessibility, that is part of the solution as I see it. But there is also, and we shouldn't forget this, that there are so many other jobs now that can be done online. We're doing this today, aren't we? And I don't think that recruitment and targeted recruitment has particularly, at this moment in time, moved with that. So where somebody is geographically located, if that is a constraint to them getting to jobs, we should think about what we can do in the immediate space around what job opportunities could be put their way, where they could maybe do it more remotely. And I think that's an area that we certainly need to explore. Housing, I agree with you. I don't think anybody's going to disagree. We all know housing is an issue in this country, both in terms of the pressure on development, on the demands on local communities for what that means around infrastructure, and of course the cost and in some cases the condition of that housing. We are speaking to local authorities. They are not the only ones who are responsible for this. There is obviously the big piece here around private landlords and what that can mean for the social housing sector as well. That is again part of that whole partnership working piece. I agree with you over your comments about the advice that we give young people in schools and some of the opportunities there. Some schools do it fantastically. I mean, I've certainly been involved locally with one school where I think they do a brilliant job in that space. The same cannot be said across the piece. Now, obviously, we have to work more closely with the schools and see what we can do to influence that. And the example that I gave in Harlow was just one example really of where we are linking in with the private sector, recognising that we have schools in that area that would benefit from maybe considering other forms of careers for their youngsters, and to think about how we can link all of that up. But there are some case studies in here. You reference case studies. Personally, I don't put too much of a hold on that. I think I could cite you any example and you can normally find an example to make your point, can't you? So I don't really want to go down the line of the anecdotes, albeit that some of the quotes and that, can obviously be helpful at certain times. For me, it's got to be about the core data, which comes on to your point around how we're tracking this. And it has to be about how we're moving some of the dial on this stuff. So, we know when we look at some of the school readiness figures in certain areas that obviously on the back of the pandemic that they were worse than we would have wanted and that they had been previously. Progress has been made in that area. So I'm much more interested in the hard data that we can start to look at. Now, some of that we can look at in the here and now, others it will take time to build up. We're not going to be able to look at GCSE results for the 4-year-olds that we're now trying to make, school ready. So some of that, obviously, depending on what it is going to be driven by what the appropriate time is that we can start to look at that. But it is about some of those indicators and then thinking about the broader programme impact and the bit that we still need to work on. And Richard, I don't know if you want to come in here, but it is around how we have the individual initiatives and how we pull all of them together. So we may have outreach on literacy for parents from libraries. We may have school ready sessions in libraries for youngsters before they start school. We have got the Essex Year of Reading in schools. We've got a number of different initiatives that are taking place, just to use that one example. What we need to get, and obviously this is still early days, lots of this has only just started, but what we need to do is get better at understanding how that then comes together and the impact collectively is then had on, in that particular example, literacy. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to add to what Louise has said, I think there are 3 levels at which we are thinking about the need to evaluate. So there is the project level, so we've got individual initiatives. Are those initiatives successful in terms of delivering what they said that they would deliver? If we add all of those initiatives up and look at the programme as a whole, has the programme as a whole delivered the outcomes that we were seeking at the outset? And then we're looking at what the impact is on the wider population. So we've got a sort of project programme and sort of contextual set of measures that we want to use to help us understand the success of the levelling up work. But I think it's a fair point that, as Louise and other colleagues have mentioned, this isn't the sort of thing that can transform overnight. So this is a sort of multi-annual activity for us, which again I think is one of the learning points for us. So if Louise has mentioned, I think that one of the important dimensions of this work for the County Council is to operate across different parts of the organisation, across different partners. The other key learning point, I think, is that we can't always turn this around in 1 year and be subject to annual budget cycles, that we have to think about this as a programme that extends across multiple years if we're going to have the impacts that we're seeking to have.
Councillor McGuinn.
Thank you, Chairman. It strikes me, firstly, thank you very much for the report. It was an excellent read over the weekend. It strikes me that we've done perhaps the easy part, although you may disagree with that. But to an extent, we've been going for the low-hanging fruit, the things that are easy to see in terms of the interventions that we've done so far. Could you perhaps provide us with an insight in how we can drill down into the difficult areas to ensure that we're engaging with all the smaller areas that are falling behind? You know, how do we know what we don't know, and how do we measure what we don't know we've got to measure?
Yeah, they're very good questions, and you know, I think what it shows is just how complex and multifaceted this entire subject is. Did we go for the low-hanging fruit? So to the outside world, the glossy launches in each area probably did look like it was the low-hanging fruit. Those that were actually involved in the organising, I think, might take a different view, because I know that that was quite hard at times. But of course, before all of those launches was a lot of work that was done, particularly by Richard and the team, around understanding the data. Because what we said, very quickly, we can all come at this with pre-assumed ideas of what you think is the problem, what you think is going to work, and we all do that. And to a degree, that is part of a healthy discussion. But ultimately, if you're going to have a programme that you want to be able to measure, and that you want to be able to obviously ultimately have an impact, you've got to understand what's underlining it. So there was, I think it was about 4 or 5 months of work, wasn't it, of considerable work that took place for us to really get underneath it, to understand it. So, as much as we identify the 6 locations and we talk about those groups, there's a wealth of data that sits underneath them. Some of that is easy, and I say easy, it's easy to understand, it's easy to measure. But when you get into things like aspiration and accessibility of opportunity, that's very different. And we all know how important your own dinner table is in places like that. And I think it's back to your point around you know what you're surrounded by and what you're exposed to. Understanding the problem is one thing. What you can do about that is another altogether. But underlying all of what we are doing is that wealth of data, which we have tested internally. The bit that we now need to do is to see, we know what the problem is, and we think we know what we can do to help move the dial in some of those areas. It's obviously testing that. And I said right at the outset of this programme, some of that stuff will work and some of it won't. And we need to be honest about that. And where it doesn't, then we learn from that and move on. And where it does, we look to see what we can do to upscale. So again, back to the example that I gave around, it's only because it happened on Friday in Harlow, that is a new partnership that we have with UKPN. We will be looking very closely at not just what the feedback is, and I think this is like a traditional mistake that local government makes. We take feedback instead of actual real results and outcomes. So, a positive note from the school saying how good it was and that the kids enjoyed it, fine. But what does that actually mean? Does that mean they went home and told mum, dad, aunt, uncle, whoever? Or does it mean that it's actually leading to follow-ups? Is somebody therefore getting work experience? Is somebody having a serious conversation about doing physics that they weren't having before? Or all of those real outcomes that are ultimately going to drive the change? And that's the bit that's, for obvious reasons, are much harder to actually understand.
So do we have confidence that we have identified those things that we should be measuring and then able to act on? I mean, have we gone through that exercise and completed it, or have we got that task yet to do?
I think in some cases, yes, absolutely, we do know what we can measure. Others, particularly around new initiatives, that work would still need to be done. And it's the balance around the quantitative and the qualitative each time we do that. Do you want to come in there?
No, I think that's right. I think, as Louisa said, we've sort of focused on the place element in the first year, and I think in those places we have relatively detailed action plans with measures that link to the 12 missions, and it sort of pushes a little bit into the devolution conversation. I mean, part of the challenge here is that you're trying to deal with fairly entrenched, complex problems that are pushing at the limits, I think, of the current abilities of local government to address, and that is why there is a linkage, I think, between levelling up and devolution. But in order for us to progress further faster, for example on skills, which is a key determinant of economic outcomes for people who maybe are not achieving the best economic outcomes, further devolution would enable us to tailor our skills provision to the needs of local populations in a way which is quite difficult to do at the moment. So we have clarity, I think, about the areas of focus. In most places, we have sort of relatively detailed action plans. We've got ways of measuring that, but I think the reality is we're sort of pushing against the limits of our ability to actually transform what happens in those places without the further devolution that we're seeking through the devolution deal. And the early part of this conversation, that's the linkage, I think, between those two things.
And I think we're stepping into conversations that we previously wouldn't have had. So I went to visit a primary school in Basildon, and the discussions with the head teacher, she was saying that there are children in the school where they have multi-generational unemployment. And when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, they'll say, oh, I don't want to work, my mum doesn't work, my dad doesn't work, or whatever. And that is not really a conversation that we as a county council would have been involved in before. So the school's obviously doing work there, but now us linking up with the school and being able to put other programmes in place, everything from the HAF programme through to a community hub that's being, that's the school actually introduced, but looking at how we can give additional funding around support for some of the parents to try and get the messages through to them as well. This is a whole new territory for us. We just simply wouldn't have been part of that conversation before. So a lot of this is like test and learn as we go as well. And that's the bit that's harder to obviously give you a concrete answer on.
Can I just come back on that, if I may? We've had experience in other committees, in other scrutiny scenarios where we've been made aware of deficiencies in training, particularly, and if I take that as one example, particularly around some of our larger institutions that we have in the county and their inability to get the correctly trained personnel to fill those many open roles. And it's difficult to identify from a scrutiny point of view where the council can change some of that narrative in order to get that engagement and that connection between the educational establishments and the institutions that are going to take those people. And that's very regionally based and individually based within each of our divisions. And it's getting down and identifying where those problems are and how we might be able to solve some of those. And they're new areas, I agree. This is breaking new ground in terms of trying to get the levelling up agenda levelled up.
I mean, it's certainly new areas for us. And that's not a reflection on that the schools are doing anything badly. It's just as part of the levelling up agenda, we are stepping into these conversations effectively for the first time in one guise or another. And I think it's about us looking at what we can do to obviously work with the schools, but also to think more broadly. Comes back to, what are our levers? What can we do internally with, library outreach visits, whatever it may be, the holiday programme, what can we do around one of the local businesses coming in and speaking to children? If you're in the mindset at 6, 7 years of age that you're just not going to work, I would say there's no point leaving careers advice until you're 14, 15. You've got to start something a lot earlier. So there could be different ways in which we do things, whereas, we would normally focus advice on careers at secondary school level. Is there an argument to say that in certain areas, in certain schools where that is a problem, that we have to get in much earlier? And it's not that people aren't sort of doing their bit. It's just that for us as an organisation, it's new ground that we wouldn't have been involved in before.
Okay. Can I just clarify how you fix the time? I think you've be away by 12.
We have to be on a 12 o'clock meeting. Most of it actually on this panel and need to have a 12 o'clock meeting to see what is clear.
Okay. Councillor Siddle.
Yeah, Richard, can I just say thank you for your very honest and communication there in terms of what you can achieve in the time frame. I think that's really important that we focus on. This is not just the first year. This is the start of many years' progress that we're going to make. I think there's lots of us as councillors that would be shocked that the prepayment vouchers that were handed out for electricity to some of the most vulnerable in our society, something like 70% weren't taken up. And one would question, why was that? How do we measure that? I just wondered whether whether you could talk about how we're looking at that, where we're going with those sorts of things. You would have expected those vouchers to be the first ones taken up. because those were the ones that are the most vulnerable and in difficult positions. But it's astonishing that they weren't. And hopefully this work that we're doing now will give us some view and ability to reach into those spaces.
Yeah, so I think that's a really helpful question. So one of the things when we're thinking about how do we support people living in the most difficult circumstances in our communities, one of the most obvious things is to make sure that they take up the benefits to which they're entitled. And benefits take up is actually pretty low on quite a lot of areas. We do have ways into understanding that. So we have built partly the system is very complex for people to navigate. So we have built a sort of our own calculator to enable people to sort of think about if they work extra hours, what the impact might be on benefits and whether they can access some entitlements. We're testing that with the DWP at the moment, so we haven't sort of fully made that available. But that's a way of us helping people understand how they can maximise their financial circumstances. The other thing we're looking at is another programme which enables people to, and this is working with the districts, using their sort of Rebs and Bens functions to target households where we know that actually they're not accessing their entitlements as well as they might. So I think there are things that we can do. It sort of sounds surprising, but I think there's quite a low level of take-up of some benefits across the county. And that is an obvious way in which you can help people ameliorate some of the impacts of cost of living and what have you that we're facing at the moment. I don't know, Louise.
Yeah, the obvious example around that is the childcare element of universal credit, which, and I forget the exact figure, but it is very, very low, the take-up in terms of people who are entitled to that. So we are looking at what we can do around raising awareness and how we can obviously not just use social media, but use, again, our contacts and the schools, etc., to push the message out. And I think sometimes people, benefits get lumped into one big category, don't they? And that doesn't help, I think, with the messaging as well. So there is more work to be done on that to make sure that people are aware.
There was a piece on the Radio 4 this morning talking about exactly what you were just saying with regards to the take-up on the welfare on that.
Okay.
Very, very low. But I think the Chancellor was looking at that to find out why that was. So it was
It's a national problem, it's not unique to Essex.
Councillor May.
Thank you. And I want to say, first of all, thank you, because levelling up is really important. As you know, my area is one of the worst in the country. So, but what I want to bring up is about working with local businesses and things like that. Starting off with, our NHS is the third biggest employer in the world. And virtually not going into schools, promoting all the careers opportunities and things like that. So I think if we can get businesses going into schools earlier and start promoting that, that gives people children and next generation opportunities. And also, you've got DP World here. I went with a group a few weeks ago, and by working and going over the places, you see a lot more. And it's how we can work with them to promote them. As I said at one of our meetings, over at DP World at Croydon, they've got the biggest container cranes in the world over there. And they trained the very first female in the world to operate them. And she come from Canvey Island, which is, so could we not work with businesses to help them promote more what they do and the opportunities out there? Because you've got the same, you're hearing that the police are finding it hard to recruit people and things like that, so if we could work with them and get when I was a kid, the police used to come back into the schools quite a lot and used to get to know them personally. But now it's just the police, So I think if we could get our organisations going into the schools and working with them, that would be a win-win. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's exactly what I was referring to, both in terms of Essex Partners. So the NHS is part of that, where we're doing a mapping exercise to understand what each organisation is currently doing. Because none of this is new. Everyone's got some sort of work experience or, young person, apprenticeship scheme, whatever it may be. But it will look different in different organisations. So the work that we're doing via the Essex Partners is to understand that better, what we already have, and then to identify where the gaps are. And then, as I was referencing with the private sector, it's really only been, I would say, since the autumn that we've really got on board with some of the businesses that I've mentioned. And we have started to do work as I highlighted in that space, but there is definitely more to do. And one of the things that I want to do is get the key businesses around the table and to have those conversations. You've just launched the broader Essex Business Board as well, and we've met once there. I mean, they're the really big organisations, but I think there's an opportunity to do this on more of a micro basis as well. So the local, the employers in the local area, what does that look like? Because they will obviously be able to go into schools and have different conversations that's pertinent to that area, that may not be obviously as relevant elsewhere. So I think there's much more that we can do in that space, and that's something that we're looking at for this year.
Okay. Well, thank you, members. Thank you, Councillor McKinley. We welcome the opportunity to discuss the levelling up work and scrutiny. I will propose to bring you up an annual report to the scrutiny review.
Thank you.
Thank you. I need to...
Councillor Henderson.
All right. Councillor Henderson, very quickly.
Yeah, it was just a quick one on the response from the Deputy Leader on the issue of transport being a barrier, the cost of transport. And when she mentions about connecting with parents and encouraging young people to hire their aspiration, if you like, in opportunity, it will come at an early age, perhaps in secondary school, where it will be mentioned to young people that to actually attend, and I'm not talking about study online, I'm talking about the construction industry, the electric, the type of training that we need, the green energy industry, which we're looking at loads of jobs being created over the next few years. A lot of these have to be done on site, and I think we should be presenting a clear message that there will be assistance to young people if they choose one of those industries to actually train in and want to go to the institute or the sixth form college. There will be help to help them actually gain access to those that type of education via the necessary transport means.
Yes, so I mean, I would just say that what the opportunities are going to look very different in every area for obvious reasons, and there is no one solution. I completely take your point that of course there are some jobs and some opportunities where people will need to physically be there. My point around online is that I think that is an untapped area for many people now around job opportunities. So there will be, we see it here. There are people who work for ECC who live a long way away, and in the old world probably wouldn't have even considered a role here because they would have been expected to come in 4/5 days a week. So I don't think we should dismiss the piece of the opportunities around online. That's something that I'm certainly keen to explore. But in terms of those opportunities where you need to be physically present, I think that's back to the conversation we were just having here in terms of Canvey Island, that getting those employers together on a more of a local basis to understand and go into schools and explain what those opportunities are, to then follow that up with experience on the ground, which would be on a local basis. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and start making pledges to fund people's travel. We just don't have the funding on that. That's outside of our remit. And again, I'd come back to the discussions we were having before around Devo and some of the opportunities there. But this is about us recognising what we can do as the county council, both in terms of intervening, but also thinking about what that means around forging those relationships with others, with the private sector, and thinking what that can then mean for people in schools and those opportunities on the ground.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we do need to move on, I'm afraid. We're fast running out of time. Okay, we need to move on to the next item, which is Appendix 3, Performance Quarter 2, 2022 to 23.
Everyone's Essex.
Everyone's Essex. He's picking up on this.
Well, Chairman, for the sake of time, the report is there, clearly the figures there, there's commentary with each of the items. Should we run out of time for questions, may I just make a suggestion that we will need to go. If members have questions not answered, perhaps they could, with your permission, channel them through Mr Hughes, and then we will make sure written replies go back to him. I wouldn't want people to miss the opportunity because we have to leave. But the report is there, and it's up for any scrutiny and questions you wish to have on it.
Questions, members? Councillor McGood. Members,
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at a good, I don't know whether colleagues have got any questions earlier than a good place for children and families to grow. Mine's quite towards the end. But if not, I'll jump in. So yes, it really touches on what Councillor McKinley was talking about earlier in terms of intergenerational unemployment. There may be a good reason why it's not included, but to me, it looks like an omission. There's nothing on children missing in education, which is a massive problem nationally and sadly is a problem in Essex as well. And you may be aware that there was a working group which looked into this and made submissions to the government. Where that ever went to, I don't know. But I mean, obviously, if children aren't actually in school, let alone what they do in school, it is going to have a massive impact on their later life and also the impact on public persons, so on and so on and so on. So I just wonder if there's a reason why that is not included as an indicator.
So, I mean, I'll come on to the officers in a second, but my understanding is that what's recorded was reviewed and agreed some time ago, and that, you know, obviously that can be added to, but there is a tendency there then that would be added to each time. So I think that we just need to understand the process for actually agreeing what we track. The other piece that I would just question is whether we have something in here that we can't actually influence or control. And that's always a judgment call because, you know, you're right, we are doing work with the schools and I've just spoken about some of it, but ultimately attendance at schools, I wouldn't be confident that we as a local authority would actually be the ones that would move it in whichever direction because, you know, that's a lot of that is down to the schools themselves in terms of how they engage, through support, of course. So I think that's a judgment call in terms of what goes in and what we measure.
Yeah, so we have we have 3 levels of measurement. We have operational measures, which are much more detailed, which go into the portfolios and are discussed by the services, which they need in order for them to operate and deliver their services. We're bringing here a sort of what we're calling strategic measures. So these are sort of the sort of next level up, and then we've got a set of whole population contextual measures. So we're only bringing one set of the totality of measures that we're tracking. We could bring more data. I think we do have the data. I mean, part of this conversation, following discussions, I think, with Councillor Pond and others, was to think about what type of conversation you want to have at the scrutiny sessions around performance. That's why I think we brought in the devolution and the levelling up pieces as specific conversations to have a sort of more detailed discussion. But if there are elements driven by looking at the report where you think it would be helpful to dive a little bit deeper, then we can certainly do that and provide information either outside of the meeting or, you know, as a sort of deep dive in the sessions if that's useful.
And that level of detail would be used by the service, wouldn't it, to determine, via education and children's for that matter, to do any sort of cross-pollination of data around children's services and non-attendance at schools and any work that they then would need to do in that space, but that would be at an operational level.
It just seems pretty fundamental to me that if children aren't actually even going to school, then you haven't got a hope in hell, as it were.
Just to add to that, does that include children that have been homeschooled?
So in terms of, just for clarification, that particular measure, as you mentioned, Councillor, is actually in the contextual measures. So as Richard outlined, so it's in the sort of the higher level reporting that we do. And actually what we look at specifically in the indicator that was agreed is about the gap between the most deprived areas and the county average in terms of school absence rate and school exclusions. As sort of noted, the different levels, so actually the functions, so education will look at these measures on a much more regular basis than we report on them here. And we also look at it so that we are able to bring that information together to look at not just school exclusions, but also thinking about missing children in the wider context for the most vulnerable children that we have in the county.
Thank you. Councillor Fleming,
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who this is for. It's everyone's favourite subject, highways, page 59. I just wanted a bit more clarification on the figures. It says percentage of A roads where maintenance should be considered 3%, value at Q2. What is that? Is that resurfacing or?
I can answer. So yes, it's a level of that. Each road, A roads are on a rolling programme of work that runs through, and they are either micro-surfaced or they're resurfaced with what we call surface dressing, where the cars drive over slowly, it's rolled and then it stays in, or it's complete resurfacing of tarmac. There are 3 levels of doing it. So that's what that's referring to, and it's a rolling programme of roads that are done. These are the main A roads that we look after.
Okay, so is that 3%? Yeah, so 3% are in need of resurfacing. It doesn't refer to potholes or anything.
No. That's about that's the maintenance of them. That's ongoing maintenance potholes. This is a programme piece of work.
Okay, good.
Councillor Goody.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to pick up on the question that Councillor McCrory put, because as you may recall, there was a significant amount of work done over quite a long period about children missing education and home education and all that goes with that. And I just wondered whether, I do accept that it's something that isn't directly in the control of the county council, because obviously it's often a parental choice or whatever. But of course those statistics do quite significantly impact on the level of outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So I would urge that something that attention was paid to that, because clearly that does affect particularly children in deprived backgrounds, particularly children with special educational needs, who maybe then have a longer lifetime restriction in terms of the employment that they can gain. And I just wonder if that's worth making sure that those statistics are included, even though they may actually be something that we're not directly in control of, but as I said, do have an impact on the outcomes.
I mean, they are included, aren't they? We do look at them. It's just at what level, whether it's at this forum or whether it's within the service or whether it's more contextual level. So, I mean, they absolutely are considered, and I totally agree with you. If a child's not at school or in any form of education, I mean, you can kind of write the book there, can't you? But it is about the appropriateness of this level for that particular one versus, I mean, at the risk of sort of repeating what's been said, I think it's just about having it at the right level in terms of that information.
Chairman, I feel we have to go to our meeting.
I was just going to say.
May I suggest if other colleagues have questions, if you channel through Mr Hughes, then we will pass back written replies to them, okay?
I'd like to thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you for hearing us. Good questions by everyone.
I think it's been very interesting.
Leave them there if anybody does. Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll move on now to the work programme on page 64. Line it.
Yeah, Chairman, so if I can maybe come in there. So it's laid out in the pack. We have our business lined up for the next meeting, which is only 10 days away, because of this meeting being effectively the February meeting. It's been pushed back a couple of times, so sorry, you will be back here in about 10 days' time, but we have ways of working, and it's a property strategy review, and I believe also there's going to be a second part to that, which is on the Mighty contract. So that's comprising the whole meeting. They've requested actually a whole sort of morning slot for that. So that's the 23rd of March, and we're working on getting a procurement update for the committee at the meeting in April. So I think we know what we're doing for the next couple of meetings at least.
Okay. Anybody got questions on that?
I just wondered if we should be building in the devolution next stage into our work programme, and either in terms of working with other councils or with a view to coming back after this next phase has been completed.
I think it's going to be quite interesting to be working with some of the other councils on their scrutiny.
So as I understand it, Councillor McGuigan, the next step I think is for the scrutiny board to reflect on this discussion and agree sort of what they would like to see done as regards scrutiny arrangements. So I suspect there'll then be a link back to this committee.
Can I bring Councillor Gooding in on that point?
I was just going to say what Graham has already said. I think what I will ask to happen is for the paper to be brought to the next scrutiny board so that we can plan this ahead. And obviously members of this group are party to that, so I think that would be a good way to do it. Certainly to bring things together.
Councillor
I was hoping that we could look at the infrastructure funding statement. Again, that's published 31st of December. Every council has to publish it. I know at Malden they suddenly announced that they put theirs back till March. But if ours, I haven't looked whether we've published ours. I just think that would be quite a useful thing to have a look at again, just to keep focus on there.
Is this something, sorry, I'm not familiar with this. So is this an Essex County Council?
Yes, so
as opposed to a district statement.
Central government, that is. A couple of years ago, or maybe pre-pandemic, they ruled that every council, district or county council, had to publish an infrastructure funding statement by the 31st of December each year. It says how much monies have been taken in section 6, how much is spent. I just think that, given that a lot of us have a double hatters, so we probably hear from our residents all the time about infrastructure delivery. I think that would be a useful thing to have a look at.
I'm quite pleased that somebody else has mentioned section 106. Saves me doing it. Councillor Henderson. Councillor Henderson.
Sorry, I haven't got my hand up, Chair. I'm fine.
Okay, Councillor Pond then. You're on mute.
It was off mute for most of the meeting. Mary?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. This is just to say there are two things. First of all, on the devolution scrutiny, I think it might be advantageous because we've got our own meeting on the 23rd, whether Ray could facilitate an exchange by email for the scrutiny board to explore ideas within the next 10 days. I don't think it needs a formal resolution, but it does need some preliminary discussion. And the second thing, I was going to contribute in the questioning of Louise McKinley, but you were getting very close to time. But what I would like to see is a list of the 50 most deprived areas in the county, SOIs or wards, and a report as to what the levelling up process has actually done for each of them. I realise it's going to be thematic, for the coming year, but at the end of this year, I think we will have something along those details. But we can discuss that under the work programme on the 23rd.
Anything else? Okay, I think that covers that particular item. Okay, date of the next meeting, as Graham has said, is the 23rd of March. Here in Committee Room 1. Urgent business?
Not aware of any.
Okay. And I take it there's no exempt business?
No.
Okay, on